Okay, so we're here to explain what is behavior statement, and in this conversation for designing behavioral change, we are here to influence or input some ideas that can influence the behavior that leads to an outcome. So definitely, we need to talk about underlying behavioral factors, and before we can address the behavioral factors, we need to identify the behavior itself that's causing the results before we can even uh, look at the behavioral factors that's influencing the behavior that we want to change. And when we have a behavior statement, it creates a common understanding for people. We know that, okay, what are we going to address, and we can maintain on course, and measurements becomes easier because if we see that the behavior is being practiced, we are able to quantify when it's quantified. We know how to make adjustments. We know whether it's we're on track or off track, or whether it's effective or not effective. So the statement is the starting point for a lot of conversations. So when we design the behavioral statement, there are three items that will be included. And typically, you have the target group, the action, and the details. So, I'm going to expand why these three are important and what you should also take note of for each of these items listed. So, firstly, when we talk about the target group, we need to be as specific as possible. So, we can't, let's say, if the behavior is where we're talking about a conversation regarding drivers' behaviors on the road, we can't just say all drivers. We need to be narrowing down to a certain persona of drivers. For example, drivers driving cars of a certain brand or a certain type, and maybe a certain age group during a certain period of time. That will help us to measure it better, or else when it's too broad, it's hard when we do, even when we go to implementation, it's very, very hard to measure the outcome, let alone planning for the implementation or identifying the behavioral factors that is causing this effect or problem. So be as specific as possible. Next, it doesn't necessarily have to be the end user whose behavior needs to change, or the target user. So, for example, if for this photo example, we want to improve we want to have an impact on the mortality rate of babies. We are not going to be creating an implementation strategy to teach the babies to be more hygienic or wash their hands after every 15 minutes, right? So that doesn't make sense. So we need to widen our scope or our lens a little bit further. Sometimes there are influencing parties involved that are causing uh, those outcomes, or the influencing parties' behaviors are generating the results, not the direct target audience. So we need to widen out a bit. For example, for mortality rates for babies, we had to talk about the doctors, mothers, or any of the patients or any visitors. They need to practice, they need to have good hygiene practice so they don't infect these babies. So don't need to be too narrowed focus on the target user. You can expand and leverage on the influencing audience. So next part is the action that you want to exact for your behavioral statement. It can't be too broad either, because otherwise again it fails the criteria of being able to measure and observe. So for example, you want the students at a particular school to practice. You notice that students at particular schools have been falling sick regularly, and the some of the teachers have made preliminary observations that, hey, maybe it's because they are not washing their hands. So you can't just say, okay, I want the students at this school to start all the students to be washing their hands regularly. So that is a behavior statement, but that's not an effective behavior statement. An effective behavior statement explains detail as much as possible. You want to talk about frequency, whereby how often do you want them to wash their hands? You want them to wash their hands every single 5 minutes, or only when they come down for recess? And the timing, again, does it have to be only during recess, or can it be any other time? Or are you talking about certain time of the day as well? Quantity, do you want to wash their hands maybe uh, as a group, or maybe in as a collective or individually? So that's kind of a quantity conversation. Duration, are they supposed to wash their hands open-ended by every time they wash after they eat, or duration you're talking about they must wash at least 5 minutes before they move on? Location, do you want them to only wash their hands in the canteen, or they can wash their hands anywhere, even in the washroom? So yes, you want to be specific, but try not to be too specific to the point whereby you start to make the implementation too difficult, or the statement too rigid for any room or margins for people to, in the down the line, for you to be able to exact an effective implementation plan. So as you can see, students at X primary school, we have a target group for primary school, and then the action we're talking about wash their hands with soap, and it needs to be present, because you can't exact behavior based on past action in the present, what they can do in right now or in the coming future. And details are daily every time before they eat or lunch for recess. So you got to bring all this together, and then you know that you have crafted an effective behavior statement, and that will allow you to have clarity on what behavioral factors, or how what kind, whether you can see down the line, will it lead to an effective implementation plan to influence that behavior. So yeah, behavior statement is going to be important. It's one of the key starting points to effect an effective behavioral change.